the Seminoles are the black Seminoles, and of course it kind of goes both ways. Just using the name Seminole means, of course, that's the Seminole people. And then when they use the term black Seminoles, that's to indicate there's a little differentiation there, because amongst the Seminole people, which are a mixed people, there were also some blacks that comprised or that made up the Seminole people. And from the earliest times of our people in the, say, Florida Territory, the Seminoles and the black people became a unit where they lived together in close proximity. There was some intermarriage between the blacks and the Seminoles. Actually, the term Seminole, it means it was first applied to the native people that came from the southeastern part of the United States and went into the Florida Territory. They were trying or seeking to get away from the settlers. And these people came from more than one, say, Indian tribe or group. And once they arrived in the Florida Territory, they began to first call them Cimarrones, which meant that they were like runaways. So they were running away from the southern states, going as far as they could go, and then trying to seek refuge in the, say, state of Florida or the territory of Florida. And these people consisted of natives and also black people that mixed together. And at the start of the first Seminole War in the early 1800s, well, the war was not just a war against natives, it was a war against black and natives. And I've got ancestors that participated in both of those wars, the first and the second Seminole War. During the second Seminole War is when our people were then, they were offered the opportunity to leave the Florida Territory and then relocate to the Indian Territory, where they were offered freedom and land ownership. Of course, once they arrived there, well, the thoughts of freedom and land ownership, well, those were pushed aside. And so that's why they decided in 1849, in late 1849, to leave the Indian Territory and to seek refuge in northern Mexico.
Hello to all my friends there in Allen, and a very special hello to Texas Ranger Leroy Young. I know how hard it is to write a book, and I really wish you the best with your first book and hope that everything goes really, really well for you. My dad, Roy Rogers, would have been so happy to hear that not only are you part Seminole, because he was a little bit Choctaw, but also because he was one of your heroes and sort of helped you make your decision to go into the lawmaking. And the fact that you're a Texas Ranger would be great, because my mom was one of the biggest Texas boosters ever. And I wish you all the best. And to all of you gathered there, hope you have a great, great evening. Happy trails.
Leroy Young was handed his silver Texas Ranger badge on September 6, 1988, but as one newspaper reporter wrote the following morning, the distinctive star in the circle Cinco Peso hadn't come on a silver platter. As public information officer for the Texas Department of Public Safety, the state law enforcement agency that includes the storied Texas Rangers, I did the groundwork to publicize Lee's promotion. This involved notifying the news media of the date, time, and place of the promotional ceremony, writing a news release on his coming promotion, along with that of two other Rangers, arranging interviews with the newly commissioned Rangers, and answering questions from print and electronic journalists. DPS promotional ceremonies happen with regularity and generally are only a big deal to those who are getting an increase in responsibility and the pay raise that deservedly goes with it. And their families, of course. This Austin event, however, was different. Young was the first black modern-day Texas Ranger, coming only 12 years before the beginning of the 21st century. That made Lee's promotion a major state and national news story. While I'm proud of the work I did to facilitate public awareness of Lee's transition from a well-trained, well-regarded highway patrol trooper to a well-trained, well-regarded Texas Ranger, I'm sorry that the matter of color had to be part of the equation. The DPS had been receiving criticism from the NAACP and others for waiting so long to promote a black to the Rangers. But on the occasion of his promotion, Lee took the high road. Racism, he said, quote, is part of our society, and we have to contend with that, close quote. The way Lee contended was by being a consummate professional who got the job done throughout his more than 3 decades of service to the DPS and the people of Texas. Following Lee's retirement in 2003, I was honored when he asked me to edit his autobiography, Lee Young, Memoirs of a Black Seminole Texas Ranger. Congratulations to Lee. I wish I could be at the talk today, but I can't do that, but I'll be there in spirit.
Today, I look back at the Department of Public Safety. Back in 1988, well, I was the only one. Now we've got people who look like me all over the department, all over the Rangers. We've even had one Ranger, Black Ranger, that was chief of the Rangers that came in after me. And today we have majors and captains there in the Rangers. And back years ago, I don't think that was probably not even thought of until I came in 1988, and then after that point, more and more people have since then joined the Rangers. Today, the Rangers even have a female major, and the females came after me, and back in the years when I worked in Garland or the Dallas office, one of the first females was stationed there, and she and I worked together. And I kind of think that I had something in helping her get her feet on the ground. So she made a good Ranger.
Thank you. My name is Kyle Tollifer, and I'm our Assistant Chief of Police here in Allen. And I just want to take a second. When we were asked, one of us from the command staff, to introduce Ranger Young, I wanted to volunteer because I have a close connection. My father-in-law was a DPS trooper for 40 years and actually got to work with Ranger Young in Collin County. And the Rangers, the reputation and the quality of work that they do is second to none. When I was in Quantico, Virginia at the FBI National Academy, peers from all over the world and the country asked me, did I ever get to work with Rangers? And I did. So they are revered and prestigious, and the level of work they do is amazing. And we as Texans should be very proud to have those Rangers as part of our DPS. So Ranger Leroy Young was born in Del Rio, Texas. After graduating high school, he served 4 years in the United States Navy. And after being discharged from the Navy, he earned his associate's degree from Southwest Texas Junior College and then attended Sam Houston State until he was hired by the Texas Department of Public Safety in 1973. His first assignment was working Capitol Security in Austin, and he did that for 2 years. After those 2 years, he became a patrolman and served in the Bryan College Station area before being transferred back to Del Rio. Ranger Young continued to serve with the Department of Public Safety until he became the first black Texas Ranger in 1988. Ranger Young eventually relocated to McKinney, where he served in a one-person office. Before his posting, Rangers would have to work crimes in the area from larger offices out of the Garland or Greenville DPS office. Reflecting on his career, he could still recall the rush of emotions he felt the day that he first wore the Texas Ranger badge. Ranger Young says that he was treated with mutual respect that one ranger holds for another, and recalled thinking that whatever their background, all candidates had to undergo the same process to become a ranger. Ranger Young retired from the Texas Department of Public Safety in 2003, after which he started a career as a private investigator. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Ranger Young to the stage.
Thank you very much. As we like to say, estonko. It means hello. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk about two things that are dear to me: the Texas Rangers and the Seminole Indian Scouts, or the Seminoles. Many people don't know or have any knowledge or idea that there are Seminoles here in Texas. There's Seminoles in Oklahoma, Seminole Nation. There's Seminoles in Florida, the Seminole tribe of Florida. There's also the Miccosukee tribe of Florida. They're all Seminoles. First, I'll start talking about the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers have a storied history going back over 200 years. In the year 2023, we had a year-long celebration here in Texas. We celebrated the 200th anniversary of the Texas Rangers. We started in January 2023, finished in December 2023. The Texas Rangers were first organized in 1823 by Stephen F. Austin. Some of you may have heard or know the name Stephen F. Austin. He's considered the father of Texas. He came to what is known as Texas in 1823, received permission from the Mexican government to bring in settlers. So they start settling over in parts of East Texas. And back then there was no police, no sheriff, no nothing. So Stephen F. Austin decided that these settlers needed some kind of protection. So he hired the first 10 men to protect these settlers. And these men became known as Texas Rangers because they would range from settlement to settlement, protecting the settlers. That's when Texas was still part of Mexico. When Texas became a republic, they placed the Rangers under the State Adjutant General's Department. Today, the Texas Rangers are part of the Texas Department of Public Safety. They're one of the major divisions in the Department of Public Safety and have been since they first formed the Department of Public Safety in 1935. The Rangers consist of 6 companies, A, B, C, D, E, and F. There's a headquarters company, and there's the unsolved crime group also that works with the unsolved crimes here in Texas. There's a lot of interest and thought about the Texas Ranger badge. It's very unique. It's made from a 5 peso Mexican coin. It's a silver coin. I guess that's still a Ranger connection to the country of Mexico, that our badges are made from this 5 peso coin. Most of the coins are the coins that they like to use to make the badges are made 1947 and 1948. I graduated from high school in Del Rio, Texas in 1966, shortly after I decided I was going to join the Navy. That was one of my early Navy photographs there. That large, beautiful ship there is known as the USS Samuel Gompers, AD 37. That was my ship when I was in the Navy. I had the, I guess, great fortune, of being what's called a plank owner on that ship. What's a plank owner? A plank owner is a member of the very first crew of a ship. I was part of the crew that had the honor of being the crew that commissioned that ship in the Bremerton shipyards in July of 1967. Then we went out on our first cruise. That ship is known as a destroyer tender, which meant that it was basically a floating shipyard for the repairs of other ships. That ship could repair just about anything on another naval ship. We had shops to do all that type of work. The shop I worked in was the electrical repair shop. I'm going to show you a picture of another ship here. That ship was also commissioned in 1967. If you have memories from years of 1967, well, you would have to have been born prior to that. I'm not saying that anyone's old, but that's the USS Pueblo. Anyone have a little history of things going on in the 1960s, 67, 68, would probably recognize the name USS Pueblo, AGR-2. That was a naval intelligence gathering ship. In 1968, my ship I just showed you previously, the Samuel Gompers, was in port in Pearl Harbor. Just down the pier from us was the USS Pueblo. We would walk past it and kind of look over it and kind of, well, what kind of ship is that? It didn't take us long to figure out it was an intelligence gathering ship. So it leaves Pearl Harbor a few days before we do. Then we leave Pearl Harbor, and we're out at sea a few days. And my ship receives an emergency message from the USS Pueblo. They had a sailor aboard that ship that had injured his back very severely. My ship had medical doctors, had a hospital, we had dentists. So they decided they were going to bring the sailor from the Pueblo and place him in the hospital on the Samuel Gompers. So that boat there is known as a motorized whaleboat. It's a very seaworthy craft. It's propelled by an engine. That boat there came off of my boat, or my ship, the Samuel Gompers. They dropped it down into the water, took it over to the Pueblo, and they had the sailor aboard that ship, that boat there. He's there, and now they're bringing it up alongside the Samuel Gompers so they can bring that injured sailor off of there and place him in the hospital on the Samuel Gompers. That was me there doing some work on a panel there where I worked in the electrical repair shop. There's where I received my second-class petty officer promotion, and I'm receiving my promotion certificate there from the ship's captain. After I was discharged from the Navy in 1970, I enrolled at Southwest Texas Junior College in Uvalde, where I started going to college. And a couple of 3 years after that, I decided I wanted to go work for the Department of Public Safety. I was hired in 1973. That recruiting pamphlet there was made in 1974. And they decided to take a young, thin me, and I was going through some exercises there, punching the bag there at the gym there in Austin at the DPS Academy when they made that photograph there. My first assignment was at the state capitol in Austin, where I worked for a couple of years. Then I transferred to Bryan College Station, where I worked another couple of years. The photograph there is, I believe, 1978 or 79. At the time, I was stationed in Eagle Pass. In fact, I was talking with one of the troops here in McKinney the other day, and mentioned to him, in 1978, 79, I was the only highway patrol trooper in Maverick County. He said, the only one? I said, yes, I was the only trooper in Maverick County, the only breath test operator, which meant I was the only one that was trained and qualified to administer the DWI examinations to people that were suspected of driving while intoxicated. He said, I think they got about 12 troopers down there today. I said, well, I think I did a pretty good job by myself back in the late 70s there, but things have changed a lot since then. That's me where I was conducting an investigation of a motorcycle accident there in Maverick County. I transferred from Maverick County to Val Verde County of Del Rio in 1980. And 1988, I was promoted into criminal intelligence. The criminal intelligence is a service in the Department of Public Safety that has a lot to do with the investigation of organized crime, various other types of crimes here in the state of Texas. And there I'm receiving my promotion certificate from the director of the Department of Public Safety. In September of 1988, I promoted into the Texas Rangers. And there I'm receiving my Texas Ranger badge from the director of the Department of Public Safety. Every ranger has a portrait made, and that was my first portrait made there. That was one of my last portraits made before I retired. When I went into the Rangers in September 1988, I was stationed in Company B. Company B is headquartered in the Garland or the Dallas area. And that's Company B there. The entire company in September of 1988 were standing outside the regional office building in Garland. When people think and talk about Texas Rangers, they often think about horses, horsebacks, and stuff like that. Well, Rangers aren't necessarily on horseback anymore, but we do occasionally get the opportunity to ride horseback. Maybe if we're involved in a manhunt and you're trying to keep up with the dogs and everything else, you may have the opportunity to ride a horse then. This opportunity here, we just had the opportunity to mount some horses just to take a photograph. The horses are owned by the state of Texas. They're owned by the Texas prison system. And so they brought the horses out for us, and we gathered together and to have the opportunity to take this photograph. And that was in 1994. And at the same time, that's myself and Ranger Howard Dunham. And he was one of my close ranger buddies that I worked with. And in fact, he and I first became acquainted when I was still a trooper on the highway patrol in Del Rio. And he was a new ranger stationed in Ozona. And he would come down to Del Rio going and Safe Other Salt working. And that's how we met there in Del Rio. Just a few minutes ago, I showed you a photograph of the Texas Ranger Company B from 1988. There's Company B, 1952. They're somewhere over near Athens, Texas. I'm going to see if I can point him out here. I don't. From the first row, the third man, that was Captain M.T. Gonzalez, who was sometimes known as Lone Wolf. He was primarily known as Lone Wolf because he chose to work a lot worked a lot alone. That's him sitting in his car. You may notice he's got a Colt 45 on his right hip. He probably has a Colt 45 on his left hip also. He was known to pack either 2 revolvers or 2 Colt 45s. In 1988 or 1989, just after I'd gone into the Rangers, I was out working in Brownwood, Texas. I had a friend there that lived there, and then my wife had known him since our days of living and me working in Eagle Pass. And he knew I was in town, so he calls me up, and I visit with him. And he says, "Lee, my boss would like to meet you." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "He's waiting for you over at his office, his shop." He owned a company named the Ross Company. It was a manufacturing company. So I go over and visit with the gentleman. And we're sitting in his office, and he said, "Lee, I've got a story I would like to tell you." He said, I grew up over in East Texas, and my father was a good friend of Texas Ranger Captain Gonzalez. And he said, I've got a story I'd like to tell you, but a story that he told my father one time, and I was a little boy sitting there and listening. Ranger Gonzalez there, he had a warrant. I don't know what the warrant was in regards to. We'd had a warrant to arrest some character. And he had this warrant for months. He's kept trying to get this guy located, kept trying to get him located. Finally he got word that the man was in a bar over in East Texas. He was up standing at a bar drinking. So Gonzalez finds this bar, and he walks into the bar, sees the man that he's got the warrant for. He's standing at the bar with a drink in front of him. Gonzalez positioned himself a little further down the bar, makes eye contact with this individual, and finally he decides he takes out one of his Colt 45 from a holster, places it on the bar, and then slides it down the bar, and it slides down the bar, comes to rest almost in front of this guy he's got the warrant for. And he looks at him and says, "I've got the other one over here. Whenever you get ready, you make a play for that one." Gentleman looks at the Colt 45, looks back at Captain Gonzalez. Finally, he shakes his head and backs away from the bar. He said, "No, he didn't want nothing to do with that." And Gonzalez finished telling the story to this man's dad, and he says, "It's a blanky blank good thing he didn't make a play for that gun, because before I walked in that bar, I unloaded that one." There's a photograph of a couple of Rangers, A.Y.L.E. and Ranger Riggs. Why it's there, because you'll see on the back of that I'm not sure what year model that Ford is, but there's a horse trailer. At one time, Rangers had to have access to a horse and or horse trailer. They didn't have to own it. The state wasn't supplying it, but come the time that you needed to be on horseback, well, you had to have means to obtain that horse pretty quick. And if you had to transport it somewhere with your car, you had to have a trailer. And that's the way it was then. Back when I was a Ranger, I was trained as a forensic hypnotist. You go, wow, that's weird. Well, we use hypnosis as a mind, as a means of attempting to get a person's mind refreshed. For instance, if a person is involved in a very traumatic incident, they witnessed something or they've been a victim to a crime, there's things that they will not necessarily recall very easily, especially if it's something very traumatic. So we would use hypnosis to place a person in a state of relaxation where they're non-relaxed, they're safe and secure, and they could often recall things that were, say, repressed from this incident. So they decided years ago to train some Rangers and some investigators in the Department of Public Safety in the use of hypnosis. I first attended a 3-week training school for the basic certification, and then following that, I then attended a 4th week for the advanced certification. And so I served as a hypnotist for the Department of Public Safety there in the Rangers for several years before I retired. The next photograph I'm going to show you there, I believe that's a Ford Model T. A couple of Rangers in it. They're out in the Big Bend area. The driver is known as Arch Miller, and the passenger was Lee Tribble. In 1988, before I went to the Rangers, in the small town of Brackettville, where I grew up in Brackettville, they threw a reception there for me, and a lot of the people in the community attended, and the sheriff of the county, he was there, his chief deputy, and my very first school teacher. She taught me the 1st to the 4th grade. She was there. And she's sitting there and she's talking, and she said, Lee, you know, back during the years of Prohibition, no sale of alcohol nowhere. She said, there's a Ranger would come into Brackettville to work during that time, and if people had any liquor or moonshine, whatever, well, he would confiscate it. He would arrest people, put them in jail, and blah, blah, blah. And she said, he only had one arm. And she said, his name was One Arm Miller. And I'm thinking, okay, a Texas Ranger working, and he only had one arm. So the following day, I'm at home in Del Rio, and I decided to visit the home of a retired Ranger there in Del Rio by the name of Tall Dawson. He was a wealth of information about Rangers that worked that area, worked anywhere in Texas. So I go by his home, and I'm explaining this story that I'd heard the previous day in Brackettville about this Ranger they called One Arm Miller. And he laughed and said, yeah, that was Arch Miller. I said, well, is it true? My teacher told me that he only had one arm, that he got into a fight with a Mexican and got cut up real bad, and that's how he lost an arm. And he laughed and said, no. What happened was he and Lee Tribble were in an old Ford Model T out in Big Bend, and they turned it over. And his arm got messed up pretty bad. And he said by the time they got help, and he could make it to Fort Stockton to see a doctor, there was no doctors in Fort Stockton. So they tell him, probably the nearest doctor's in San Antonio. And you have to wait on the train. The train will be in a couple of hours or whatever from now, and you can ride the train to San Antonio. So he waits on the train. He boards the train, rides the train to San Antonio, sees the doctor in San Antonio. The doctor in San Antonio informs him the arm has gangrene and it has to be removed. Then Tall starts laughing. He says, that doctor in San Antonio, he had a knife and he could have been a Mexican. And I'm sure that Miller fought to keep his arm. That photograph there, the gentleman on the left, that's Arch Miller, and you can see he's got an empty sleeve there on the left side. Rangers receive a wide variety of training. There we were receiving training from the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms people in the investigation of explosive investigations. And that was our last get-together there, and they decided to make a big explosion in the background while we take a photograph there. And those are all the people that attended that training. Texas Rangers remain pretty well together and organized during our work, during our years. And that's a group of Texas Rangers in 2024. And at our annual Texas Ranger reunion. Every June, the second weekend of June, we have the Texas Ranger reunion in Waco. And many of the retired Rangers that have the opportunity do attend that. And that particular year, that was the retired Rangers there. Rangers still carry a special Texas Ranger Commission, and we are required to annually qualify on the firing range. And that's myself and two other retired Rangers that are qualifying on the firing range there. Next part of my discussion is I'm going to talk about Seminoles, Seminole Indian Scouts, and the Seminole Wars. U.S. Scouts, Department of Texas, this was the guidon that the Scouts would use when they would mount it and they would traveling somewhere on patrol. Well, this would be their guidon or their flag. Seminole Wars. Yes, there were Seminole, not a Seminole War, there were wars. There was actually 3 Seminole Wars. The Seminoles are one of the few Native American groups that were never conquered. They fought through a total of 3 wars, starting from the early 1817s, which was the first Seminole War, then the second Seminole War, 1830s, 1840s, then the third Seminole War, which went up into the 1850s. All during these wars, the Seminoles were never defeated. They had some engagements where they had some difficulties, but they were never completely defeated. Following the Third Seminole War, when the Americans finally decided to pull out of Florida entirely and end the wars, there remained something like 200 Seminoles in the state of Florida. Today, there's something like 4,000 there. I'm going back into the first Seminole War there. You notice there, it says something there about Fort Negro. Most people don't even know that there was once a fort in Florida that was called or named Fort Negro. Why was it called Fort Negro? The fort itself was built by the British in 1814. It was built during the time of the 1812 War. Remember the 1812 War, when the Americans got in the war with the British, and it lasted something like maybe a couple of years. Finally, it comes to a stalemate, and things went back to the way they were. The Americans went back to the way they were, and the British went back to the way they were. So no one won the war, and it was kind of a war that was totally ridiculous. But the British built this fort. It was on the Apalachicola River. It was on a high part there where you could look down at the river, and from that fort, they could maintain and control who went up and down the river. So it was in a very strategic location. They built it in 1814, abandoned it in about 1816. And about that time, it's when the Native Americans, blacks that live in that particular area of Florida, and escaped slaves would then seek their refuge in this fort. And they would go to the fort, and that's where they would live. And because the majority of the people there were Negro, they named it Fort Negro. During the First Seminole War in 1816, the Americans sent a ship up the Apalachicola River, and the ship fired a shot from one of its cannons, and the cannonball flew up into the air and landed over in the fort, right into the fort's magazine. The magazine is where they keep all the ammunition, the powder, and everything. It just blew everything up. Just many lives were destroyed. Some were crippled and maimed from that. But that was the destruction of Fort Negro. A couple of years later, the Americans built Fort Gadsden, that was built on the foundation of the old Fort Negro. My ancestors fought in the Second Seminole War, the 1830s, the mid-1830s to the late 1830s. They participated in that war. In about, during the time of the Second Seminole War, the commander of the troops in Florida, his name was Thomas Jessup, General Thomas Jessup. He came up with the statement there. He says, "This is a Negro war. It's supposed to be a Seminole war. They're supposed to be fighting the Indians, right?" But he was alluding to the number of black warriors that the American soldiers were encountering on the battlefield. It wasn't all just Native Americans. There was also a lot of black warriors that they were fighting. So he called it a Negro war. He came up with the idea, since he probably figured out there appropriately, I can't beat these guys, because it was a combined force of the Native Americans and the blacks during the times that their common defense was in peril. They come together, they fight together. When that problem was taken care of, then they would go back to their separate homes. The Indians would live over here, the blacks would live over here, but they maintained an alliance that they took care or helped to take care of one another in times of need. So General Jessup comes up with the idea, I don't think I can beat these people, because they were fighting as using the guerrilla tactics. They would lay in wait in the Everglades when they had the troops surrounded. They would hit the troops hard, pull back into the Everglades and disappear. So he decided to try and divide some of these people. So he called in the black Seminoles and offered them what he called the peace treaty. He said, if you stop fighting here in Florida, put down your arms here, move to the Indian Territory, you can live there in peace and freedom. So they took him up on that deal. And in 1838, my descendants left Florida. That's General Thomas Jessup there. At that particular time, our chief or the major representative of our people was a man named John Horse. John Horse. The soldiers would often call him Gopher John. And I'll tell you a little interesting story as to how he acquired the name Gopher John. They referred to gophers as turtles. Turtles were called gophers. You know, the regular turtle in a shell, they called them gophers. John Horse, as a young boy, even though they told him, don't go over there where the soldiers are at. You know, they tell all the native, all the Seminole boys, don't go around them soldiers, don't go around them Americans, don't go around the fort. But John Horse was a pretty brave little boy, and so he would hang around the fort. He'd go around the fort and talk to some of the soldiers. He got to meet the fort commander, and something came up about gophers, about turtles, and the fort commander made him a proposition. Say, all the gophers you catch, you bring them to me, I'll buy them from you. So John Horse to go out. He went out. He captured a couple of gophers, a couple of turtles, had them in a sack, brought them up to the fort, showed them to the fort commander. Yeah, I got 2 turtles here. He paid him. Then the commander hands the turtles to his cook, says, take them and put them out there in the back in a pen, and once I have enough, I'll have you prepare a meal for me and my officers. So after a few days, John comes back with 2 more turtles in a sack. The commander pays him off. In a few more days, he comes back with 2 more turtles in the sack. Commander pays him. John Horse leaves. By that time, the commander figures, okay, I've got 6 turtles. Ought to have enough for my cook to prepare a meal for me and my officers. So he tells the cook, go back there, get them turtles, bring them up here and cook them for us. So the cook goes out there and he comes back. He said, there's only 2 turtles in there. And the commander gets thinking, oh, that little Indian boy done pulled a trick on me. He's been selling my same 2 turtles back to me every day. And so he tells the soldiers, find that boy and bring him over here to me. So they find John Horse and they bring him up to the fort commander, and the fort commander reads it down to him. And John Horse stands right there and he says, yes, sir, that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. And from that point on, the soldiers would call him Gopher John. Gopher John was a son of a black woman. Some say that she was part black and part Indian, and his father was a Seminole chief. Some say that his father was part Seminole and part Spanish. I do know that John Horse was fluent in English. We think we learned that from his mother. He was fluent in Spanish. He lived in Spanish Florida. And if his father did have any Spanish in him, maybe he learned some Spanish from there. And he's also fluent in Muskogee. That's the language the Indians spoke. He often served as an interpreter for the Seminole chiefs in their interaction with the Americans and treaties and peace talks. Well, he was the interpreter. During the Second Seminole War is when he acquired the status as being a warrior from his performance in battle. And so he was a leader of my people, and he's the leader that we recognize as for bringing our people from Florida to the Indian Territory and then to Mexico. The diagram there, it tries to depict the route that our people took out of Florida, the Florida Territory, there on the lower right. They would bring our people out of Florida. They assemble them around Tampa Bay. They were assembled around Tampa Bay. Some were in shackles. Most had been captured under a so-called flag of truce. The Americans would raise a flag and say, okay, a white flag, okay, would you guys put down your arms and come in and we'll talk. And they decided to go in and talk, and they would then capture them. So some were captured. And they would then take them to Tampa Bay, place them aboard a steamship, and the ship would then leave Tampa and go into the port of New Orleans. Once they were there in New Orleans, they would go by land as much as they could, or up the river into the Arkansas Territory, and from there they go over into the Oklahoma Territory. 1838, the Seminoles arrived up there. My people, the black Seminoles, arrived there. It didn't take them very long to tell our people that now any agreement you made with someone in Florida, they're speaking to the agreement we had with General Thomas Jessup, that we would have freedom and land in the Indian Territory. They said any agreement you made with someone in Florida doesn't apply here. So that was out the door. So that goes back from back and forth from 1838, back and forth. John Horse even goes as far as traveling to Washington, D.C. Back then, the president was Polk. And this is the 1840s. It's kind of difficult for a black man to travel across country. So he gets employment with an officer as an aide or an orderly to this officer. So now he's traveling with someone. And that's how he gets across country from the Oklahoma Territory to Washington, D.C. By this time, General Jessup is also in Washington, D.C., and John Horse, supposedly, he tries to plead the case of the treaty that we made with General Jessup in Florida to President Polk. He doesn't get to visit with President Polk, and the case is presented to the Attorney General. The Attorney General was a Southerner who owned a plantation and owned slaves. And he was not going to necessarily go along with what these black Seminoles were trying to get from the government. And so he comes out with the statement that General Thomas Jessup, the commander of the troops in Florida, didn't have the authority to make that treaty. So John Harris returns to Indian Territory. In late 1849, around November 1849, the Seminoles, the black Seminoles, and there were some people that came from the Cherokees, the Choctaws, and the Creeks. They all banded together, and they departed the Indian Territory in November of 1849 and embarked upon a 9-month journey. They crossed the Red River, and they tried to bypass all the towns and settlements that they could in Texas on their journey from Oklahoma to Mexico. Because there, in the meantime, they had contacted some Mexican authorities and had received permission to enter Mexico. They were going to enter Mexico because they were being recruited to serve the Mexican government as military colonists, which meant that the Mexican government expected them to defend the Mexican northern border from hostiles coming from Texas, crossing the Rio Grande, going into Mexico, and stealing and killing people. So in 1850, their journey ends and they cross the Rio Grande just north of Eagle Pass, Texas. They cross the Rio Grande and go into Mexico, and they form a settlement just south of the city of Piedras Negras. Piedras Negras is across the border from Eagle Pass. They were just across the border there. The Mexican government provided them with land and implements and tools so they could farm, raise their own animals. Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. That was a unit of the U.S. Army that was first formed in 1870, existed from 1870 to 1914. Although it's called the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, it consisted of more than just Seminole Negroes. That was the majority. It also consisted of Creeks, Cherokees, Apaches, Yaqui, and Tonkawa Indians. You see in the photograph there's a variety of men in that photograph. You see on the far left up, there's a symbol for a Medal of Honor pointing down to that trooper's head. Well, that indicates that he received the Medal of Honor. That's Trooper Isaac Payne. He received the Medal of Honor. And you go a little farther to the right, you see another symbol for Medal of Honor. That's above the head of John Ward. John Ward was my mother's grandfather. And there are several other descendants there of my family there also. And those were two of the scouts that received the Medal of Honor. I'll pause here for a minute and explain to you something about bullies. All during the years that the Seminole Negro Scouts were active, all their commanders consisted of white Army officers. Some did a good job, some didn't do so good. Some were into it, some were not so much into it. One of the best commanders they had was this gentleman here, Bullis. And he served with them during some of their more treacherous times, some of the battles that they were involved in fighting hostiles. But I think he was quick to recognize the possibilities that he had by serving there with the Scouts. In 1875, the gentleman I just showed you, Bullis, the time he was a lieutenant, I believe he went on to become a brigadier general, but at this time he was a lieutenant in charge of the Scouts. He and 3 Scouts were out on the patrol, and they got out behind some Comanches that had stolen, like, I believe, 75 horses. They were out on the Pecos River, which is west of Del Rio. There's an area out there that they call Eagle's Nest or Eagle's Landing, and it's known by that because of eagles would often be seen in that area. Well, they were out in this area, and they had caught up with these Comanches who had stolen these 75 horses, and you're just 3 Scouts and their lieutenant, and so they get down from their horses, tie their horses to some brush, advance on these hostiles, and engage them in battle. The battle rocks on for a while, and it didn't take them long to figure out that they're pretty much outnumbered. I mean, it was just 4 against maybe a couple of dozen. So they decided that they're going to make their way back to their horses. And on the way back to the horses, the 3 Scouts was Isaac Payne, Pompey Factor, and the sergeant was John Ward. So they get back and they're mounted on their horses and they're riding away. And John Ward, he looks back and he notices that the lieutenant is not on horseback. He's still on foot. And his horse is going that way by himself. And so he calls out to the other 2 Scouts and say, "Hey, we need to go back and get the lieutenant." By this time, they're being advanced on by the Comanches, and they're firing with rifles at them. They're firing. And so the Scouts stop, they turn around, and they go back, and John Ward picks up their lieutenant, which is being depicted in that drawing there. He picks up the lieutenant, mounts him on his horse behind him, and as they're riding away, they say that Ward's carbine, it's in the scabbard next to the saddle, that the stock of it is shattered with 1 bullet round. They say another round goes through the reins for his horse, the leather reins, it goes through that. So that's how close they come to being killed. Anyway, they escape, and as a result of that, Lieutenant Bullis puts in all 3 Scouts to receive the Medal of Honor, and they eventually do. The other Scout that received the Medal of Honor was Adam Payne, and he participated with Colonel McKenzie in what was known as the Red River War, and he was cited for gallant action there in the battle. So during the service of the Scouts from 1870 to 1914, 4 of the Scouts received the Medal of Honor. When these Scouts were first recruited in 1870, a young lieutenant went down into Mexico, went into the town of Nacimiento, and he presented a deal to the sub-chief, who was John Kibit. The chief of the Black Seminole was John Horse, and a sub-chief was John Kibit. This officer presents a case to him, and he presents a proposition to him that if the men and their families would move back into Texas, the men would serve as scouts for the Army, that the government would provide them with land and a salary, a monthly salary. I think it was just a few dollars a month because they received the same pay as any private in the Army. And so they took him up on that deal, and in 1872, this is the type of homes that they lived in on what they thought was their land. That land is a part of Fort Clark, which is near Brackettville, and they called their land, or they called their land or their homes there, they called it the camp. And it was known as a camp, but it was thought as being a reservation for our people. And it was a reservation for our people from 1872 to 1914, when the Army came to the decision to dismantle the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, and at that time they were then required to leave the camp. The photograph there is the last gathering of the Scouts in 1914 before they were disbanded. That's an emblem or a monument there at Fort Clark, which attests to the courage and dedication of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. In many cases, the Scouts consisted of fathers and their sons. In my particular case, I've got ancestors or descendants that came from the July family, and Samson July, and he had 3 sons. He and his 3 sons were Scouts. They were all Scouts. And there at times they would often serve together. Absentee Seminole Tribe of Texas. As I mentioned earlier when I was starting, there are Seminoles in Oklahoma, Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. There's the Seminole Tribe of Florida. And we call ourselves the absentee Seminole. Why are we absentee? Because during the time that in the 1860s, 1870s, when the Seminole Nation in Oklahoma was being organized, our people were somewhere else, and they weren't particularly welcome back into Oklahoma. The chief at the time says that anyone who left in 1849 was no longer welcome. So our people couldn't go back and become a part of the Dawes Roll and enroll into the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. The Seminole tribe of Florida wasn't organized until 1957. 1957. Prior to that time, they were managed and run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I mean, They told them what to do and what not to do. Until 1957, they wrote a constitution. They performed a census to find out who is Seminole or can be claimed as Seminole, and then they formed the Seminole tribe of Florida. What's interesting about the Seminole tribe of Florida, they're one of the largest cattle raisers in the state of Florida. They own the Hard Rock Cafes. They own them. So from the 1850s, when there were just around 200 of them left there, to over 4,000 a day, they've come a long way. They've come a long way. Absentee Seminole Tribe of Texas was organized in 2016, organized pursuant to the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. We have a tribal council, consists of seven members, principal chief, assistant chief, and 5 council members. We're organized as a 501c3, which means we don't receive no contributions or nothing from the government. I think we can take a little time where if anyone has any questions.
Before I take the question, I want to thank Matt Preston with the VFW 2195 for bringing the Navy flag here today. Matt, would you wave at the crowd? And I saw that you did something to make sure that emblem was so I appreciate that. Any questions, comments, protests? This is the time, a library, you can say what you want. Okay. Wait a minute, I got to bring it over. I know, but you got it.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I just wonder if you could touch on one of your more memorable cases as a ranger, something that really kind of sticks with you.
Let me say, he's got so many cases that would take all night, but
A case that's interesting.
one of the things I want to follow through on, one of the cases he solved, and let me tell you something, he did his police work in the days before all this modern technology. He used old-fashioned police work. So there's 2 cases I'd like for you to tell him about. One is how you took the photograph of the missing person and went to the local Dairy Queen. Isn't that clever to go to the local Dairy Queen? He's going to know everybody's. Or was it a gas station?
Well, it wasn't quite the Dairy Queen, but at the time I was working out of the office in Garland. And sometimes we have complainants come into the office. And this lady, she lived in Richardson. She come to the office one day, she said, "I'd like to report my uncle is missing." So we go back to my office and we sit down and she explained to me that she's living in her uncle's home, her and her 2 children. And how she come to live there, she and her husband broke up. And so she goes to live with the uncle. And she lived with the uncle for a period of time, and she says, one day he just up and disappears, and I think something bad might have happened to him. Could you please help me? I said, okay. I'll go back and explain to my captain what's going on. He said, yeah, go ahead and investigate it, Lee. And so I start putting leads together and whatever, and I find out, well, he was last heard of in a county, I believe it was Kaufman County, southeast of Dallas. Okay, so I go down there. I'm driving out into this small community, and I'm thinking, how can I start here to look for this man? Well, there's a service station over here and a store. I'll just start there. So I'll go into there, and I get to talking with the gentleman that owns and runs the business. And I explained to him what I'm doing. He said, you know, I think that man might be living on my daughter and son-in-law's property. And they got a piece of land back over here. They got a few acres, got a fishing hole on it and everything. I think that man might be there. He said, if you don't mind waiting, my son-in-law is going to be by here in another 30 minutes, and he's heading out there today. Because, you know, he and the wife live and work in Dallas, but they got the land out in the country here. So I kind of hang around there a while, and wouldn't take long, and the son-in-law shows up. And I explained to him what's going on, and he says, yeah, that's the man that lives on my wife and I's property. And I'm headed out there now. You more than welcome to follow me. So I follow him out there. And sure enough, there's the gentleman I'm looking for that reported as missing by his niece. And I explained to him why I'm there. And he says, you know what happened, Ranger? I was living there by myself. My wife is done long gone past. And my niece comes in there. She and her husband break up. And she comes there with her 2 kids. And they just taking over everything. They're taking over everything. I just got tired of it. And I just left. He up and leaves his own home. And he was fortunate enough to come run into this couple that had a place out in the country. And they welcomed him to live there as long as he lives there, and he helps take care and manage their property for him. He said, Ranger, would you please don't tell her where I'm at? I said, no problem. No problem. So I'll come on back to the office, to Garland, and I think that afternoon I called the lady up on the phone. I said, hey, ma'am, this Ranger Young. I've got some good news and I got some bad news. She said, oh, wow, you found my uncle? I said, yeah, I found your uncle and he's doing well. That's the good news. The bad news, I'm not going to tell you where he's at. She didn't argue or nothing. She said, okay, thank you.
Now, this next case, I'm going to have him talk about 2 cases. This next case was one of the most heart-wrenching cases of the book. He had a number of them, but this was one of the worst. And the reason I'm bringing this out, I don't fathom, because when I go to the store, I don't care what other people are doing as long as they leave me alone. But just remember, somebody might be watching you. I want you to tell them about the case of the nice lady who goes into a grocery store late at night. It was around 10 o'clock. And tell them the story, please.
This happened in Mesquite. This lady, she was an executive at the Dr. Pepper Company in Mesquite. And one night, I don't know, 9 o'clock or so, it was already getting dark. She goes to, I believe it was a Tom Thumb store there in Garland. Goes inside and she's buying a gift. I think it was a friend. Yeah, I don't believe it was a relative. A friend that was in the hospital. A lady friend that was in the hospital had received some surgery. And so she was going to go visit this friend in the hospital and she wanted to carry something with her. So she goes by the store and gets something. And I'm sure this is all she's got her mind on. You know, she's kind of like this with blinders on and don't see nothing else. And so she goes in the store, gets what she wants, come back out, and she's attempting to get her into her car. when she's accosted by a male who attacks her, drags her, and the car that he was in with two other people had a hatchback. You know, the old hatchback, I can't remember what kind of car it was, and he drags her up into this hatch. They close it, and they drive off. They leave the Tom Thumb store and cross Lake Ray Hubbard, they go into Rockwall County, and then south of Rockwall, where she's then killed. And I believe the point that Tom was trying to make there was, I feel pretty certain that the car that these three characters were in was not too far away from her car. So she's coming out of the store, or you or I or anyone's coming out of the store late at night, and you see 2 or 3 people just sitting in the car, and they're not doing nothing. They're just sitting there looking. To me, that's suspicious. And if you see something like that, turn around right away and go back in the store. Or find someone else and get their attention. But, don't try to get in your car, because these people are sitting there and they probably got some ill intent on their mind, and they did. And they wound up killing her, and why they particularly killed her was she was former Navy. She had served in the Navy, and so she was tough. She wasn't going to be pushed around, and so she fought the guy that pulled her into the hatch of this car. She fought and resisted, and as a result, he strangled her to death.
He doesn't like to brag, but some of his old-fashioned police work got into gear, and he solved the crime. Tell us how you solved the crime. I believe it was a pawn ticket for at a pawn shop. Something came in that the burglars had sold to the pawn shop, as I recall.
Yeah, there was things involved in a pawn shop. People would steal something, take it to a pawn shop and pawn it. And I can't think of the particular case there, though. Was that in my book?
Yes, sir. They brought in some merchandise of some sort that they stole from her and sold it to the pawn shop. And he the police, he was able to connect that stolen item with the crime. How could you have remembered that small item that they sold that was part of the inventory of the things that were stolen? Mm-hmm. That's old-fashioned police work. He didn't use a bunch of buttons and looking up technology and stuff. But the reason not only did you say that she not to park next to a car full of people, but also you said look around, not just the next car, but look around.
Like you and I were talking the other day, Tom, and I mentioned my wife can attest to this. I don't sit in a restaurant with my back to the door. Him too, huh? But I don't sit in a restaurant or nowhere with my back to the door. I want to sit where I can observe the door and I can see who's coming and going. And, I know we all can't go to a restaurant and sit facing the door, but at least some of us should, though. And if you have the opportunity to, you should. And because then you see what's coming and going in that restaurant. But if your back is to it, then you don't see a darn thing.
Questions, comments, protests?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Young, for coming and speaking tonight, and thank you for everybody coming out and for your service, both past military and for your community service. I was curious if you might tell us about what you're wearing today and its significance.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. My vest here, as you see the colors, These are the Seminole colors. Over here.
There you go.
I'm sorry. Well, these are the Seminole colors. And which is very important to the Seminoles, these colors. And if you can have these colors in your dress or your clothing at all possible, well, you do. You do. You have this. And this particular vest here, it was made by Seminole in Oklahoma. And it's all handmade. And but the colors are important to us there. And this here is known as a gorget. This is something that the Native Americans received from the Europeans. When the Europeans would come over here and in their trading and their talks, they would give a chief a gorget to wear around his neck. And so the chiefs would have these. And then eventually these became a part of the dress. And so this is why I'm wearing this. And these are known as gorgets. Yes, I'm the principal chief of the Absentee Seminole. Yes.
I told you he could give a talk on the Black Seminoles and DPS. Questions, comments, protests? Got time for one or two more. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask more for personal interest. You were born in Del Rio
Yes,
and you grew up in Brackettville.
I grew up in Brackettville.
So how long were you in Brackettville? You were there until you went to the Navy?
I was born in Del Rio. I grew up in Brackettville, where I attended school until I was in the 10th grade.
Uh-huh.
My first 8 years of school, I attended a segregated school. When I was telling the story earlier about my school teacher that taught me the 1st to the 4th grade, well, 1st to the 4th grade was all in one room. And there was one teacher, and she was teaching the 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. And then once I then was promoted to the 5th grade, I went to another part of the building, but where there was a second teacher that taught the 4th, 5th.
Like
Grades.
how many students were in your class?
And I then, when I became a freshman and was promoted to the 9th grade, I then attended the school that was integrated there in Brackettville, and I attended that for 2 years. And then I moved to Del Rio, where at the time when I was growing up in Brackettville, I was raised and I lived with my grandparents. My grandmother was Seminole, full-blood Seminole, and my grandfather was Hispanic. And then once I moved to Del Rio, I lived with my mother, and then I graduated from high school there in Del Rio in 1966.
So your grandmother shared the Seminole heritage with you?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Very prominent in your...
My Seminole comes from my mother through my grandmother. My grandmother, she was born at Fort Ringo, which is located in Rio Grande City.
Yeah.
Down in the far South Texas. That's where she was born, on the fort, because her father was a scout there on the fort.
So she kept the heritage and taught you about that.
The stories and the heritage that I get, I acquired from my grandmother. Because sometimes she would sit around and talk, and most of the time she would be talking with my grandfather. She's talking to my grandfather in Spanish. And so I grew up listening to Spanish, and that's how I know Spanish.
Yeah.
But she'd be talking to my grandfather, and they'd be going back and forth, and she'd tell him about the story about her mother and father, when they came from Fort Ringo, she was a little girl, they came in a wagon. They made that journey in a wagon.
That's the area where Tom's family and my family are from.
Questions, comments? In the back? Hold on. Let me bring it.
You said earlier that you were by yourself at I think you said in Garland.
I
Were
was
you
what?
at highway patrol, or or were you a ranger at that point?
When you were alone in the cave, was that a ranger? As a ranger?
As a ranger?
Yes, yes.
Okay. How long were you by yourself at that time at that office? Do you remember?
I went first in Garland as a ranger in 1988. And
And you were by yourself? You're the only ranger?
no. At that time, I worked out of the company headquarters, which is there in Garland for Company B.
Out of
So
Garland.
there in that office, there's a captain, a lieutenant, and myself and one other ranger. So
Okay.
the four of us there in that
Okay.
office.
Okay. So, and then I know you work Collin County, so was Collin County part of that district?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, say Company B consists of, you can like go out of, say, Dallas, go north all the way to the Red River, all those counties in there, and then going east all the way to the state line. That's all Company B.
That's
And that photograph I showed earlier of all the rangers in Company B, well, they're stationed in the different counties there in Company B.
So you had quite a
There-
few counties to cover.
Well, there in Garland or Dallas, we would work Dallas and Collin, and also Rockwall County.
And all the way up to Grayson.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's something I forgot to mention. When I first went to the Rangers in 1988, at that time there were 95 Texas Rangers, 95
And the whole state?
in the whole state. That
Wow.
includes everybody, all the captains, the lieutenants, and all the Rangers. There were 95. Today there's 170. 170. You know, there's an old saying about one riot, one ranger, because that's all they had was one ranger. And so we kind of like to say one riot and like 100 troopers or 100 patrolmen, 100 policemen.
Right. Thank you.
He is the first ranger to be stationed in Collin County. He was stationed at the sheriff box, gave him an office, and you were there 6 years?
6 years, yeah. In 1994, well, prior to that, we would travel from Dallas to work Collin County. Ranger would come up here to work. And in 94, they decided to station a ranger in Collin County. And I'm there working in the company headquarters, and my captain's talking about stationing a ranger up here. I said, hey, Captain, I've been working up there with some of the guys in the sheriff's office, the PD there in McKinney, and the PD over in Salina. So what? I knew some of these guys already. I said, I don't mind transferring up to McKinney. He said, well, Lee, first thing you need to do is go visit with Sheriff Box. I'm thinking, okay, I need to go visit with Sheriff Box. Why? He says, because you need to ask Sheriff Box for an office. The state didn't have an office here for us. The troopers were working out of a courthouse annex downtown next to the old courthouse building that's now gone. Well, that's where the troopers work. So that wasn't an office up here. So I come up here and visit with Sheriff Box, and they just had the new Justice Center. It may have been 2-3 years old. And he said, man, we'll be glad to have you up here. Follow me. Takes me back to where he's got his investigators. He says, Lee, you can have that desk over there. So for 6 years, I worked out of the Collin County Sheriff's Office, which was convenient for a ranger because rangers work close with the local sheriffs and the local police department. And so by me being there with them, I was right on the ground working then with all the investigations.
I'm going to ask the last question. Tell them about the follow-up on your question. A lot of times they are called in to help small police departments where there's been a murder and they don't have the resources to process the case, so they'll call the Texas Rangers. In this particular case, he gets a call because a police officer has shot the police chief. Tell him that story.
Yeah, that happened in the mid-'90s. I hadn't been here stationed long here in Collin County. In fact, I just got through eating lunch that day, and I'm headed back to my office, and I get a call from the sheriff's office because I had their radio frequency and everything in my car, and I said there's been a shooting at the Farmersville Police Department. Shooting at the Farmersville Police Department. So I'm on 380 already. I just head towards Farmersville. And I arrive over there, and there was one deputy there from the sheriff's office, Collin County Sheriff's Office. He was there before me. And so it's just he and I there. And I noticed a tall gentleman standing off to the side, and the deputy introduces me to this gentleman. And the gentleman, he says, Ranger, I've been hearing about you. I've been wanting to meet you, but I'm sorry, I just can't shake your hand right now. That's strange. And he raises a hand, and his hand is bloody. His right hand is bloody. That's why he didn't want to shake my hand. Didn't take me long to figure out why his hand was bloody. He had been called in by his chief of the Farmersville Police Department for some disciplinary action. A few days prior to that, he gets to chasing a man that's wanted on some warrants out of Dallas County, and he pulls his revolver and fires a shot or two. And the chief has a policy regarding that. I mean, if it's not justifiable, you don't be drawing your weapon and firing it. And so Chief had called him in, and he's going to give him some disciplinary action. Can't recall what it was. It wasn't a whole lot, but he reads it off to him, and he wants him to sign the form. And the officer says, no, I'm not signing that. Besides, you're under arrest for interfering with the officer in the performance of his duties. She said, what are you talking about? He had gone as far as to Xerox copy the section out of the Penal Code where it reads, a person can be charged with a crime if you interfere with an officer in the performance of his duties. And that's what he's accusing the chief of now. And so he's now trying to arrest the chief. How do we know all this? The officer had a pocket recorder. The chief had a little cassette recorder on his desk. So from that investigation, I had 2 cassette tapes. They were identical. And so he shouts some expletive at the chief. Wasn't very nice, so I ain't going to say it in this building. And until the chief gets on his feet, you're under arrest. Chief hesitates, and he gets the guy's attention, will divert it. He makes a comment that he thinks someone is coming in the front building at the PD building. And so the guy looks that way, and the chief goes out the building this way and runs over to City Hall, which is next door to the police department. And the chief comes into the front door of City Hall, and there's a secretary sitting right there near the front door. And he shouts at her, "Call 911. Police chief is telling someone to call 911. So you know things are serious. He makes his way back to the city manager's office, and he tells the city manager what's going on. And now he's looking down the hallway. Here's the city manager's office. The doorway's here. He's looking down the doorway, down the hallway to the entrance of City Hall. Looking there, he's got his pistol in his hand, a Glock pistol. The officer had come out the front door of the PD building, went to his patrol car, and retrieved his 12-gauge shotgun. And he comes in the City Hall building, and he sees the chief with his head stuck out the city manager's office door, and he fires his first blast out of that shotgun. It takes the pistol out of the chief's hand. He's got fingers now just hanging by flesh. And officer makes his way up to the city manager's office, takes out his handcuffs, handcuffs the chief. That's how his hands got bloody.
So, were you part of the investigation of the case?
Yes, I was. Yeah, myself, and I guess I was the lead investigator, and worked in conjunction with the Collin County Sheriff's Office. We investigated it, and we attempted to take him to trial two times. Before the trial's going to start Monday. Today's Wednesday, Thursday. He gets sick, so he can't attend trial in the following week. And he happened to be a veteran, so he wound up in the Veterans Hospital, and that happened twice. The third time we attempted to have a trial, before court started, like it's coming up Monday, or the week before that, well, he commit suicide. So that pretty well did away with that.
Give 2 or 3 pieces of advice on how people should protect themselves. What would that be? So let's start with what can the public do to support law enforcement?
I think today what the public, I'm saying the public, and I'm thinking of parents, what parents instill there in their children as they're raising their children. They should be raised that they have respect for the law and order and the police. And I can recall one time I just cringed. I was watching a newscast, and there was something going on with the police and whatever, minorities and whatever. And this black man, a reporter is talking to him, and he says, "I tell my kids, if they're anywhere and they see the police coming up, for them to turn around and run and get out of there." And I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy. I mean, why would someone want to tell their children when they see the police coming, you run? I mean, if you're there and you're not doing anything wrong, stand your ground, stay there. And you get approached by the police, well, be honest and truthful with them and respectful. Tell them the truth, whatever, and don't try to engage them in don't try to start an argument with the police. And I said, man, if that's the way he thinks, and probably a lot of other people think the same way. And I said, You know, if you see the police coming, you don't run unless you're doing something wrong. Because if police arriving upon a scene and they see these two characters over here running away, maybe they haven't done nothing, but they're running. So first thought in their mind is going to be, hey, that's the two guys we got called on. And next thing is that, you know, I think the generation today are a lot different than what my generation was raised. Because I was raised up in a small town, and I was taught to respect. The only law we had in the town was a sheriff and one deputy, and one constable for the entire county. You know, well, there was no police department there, but we respected them guys, those men. We respected them, and if we happened to come across with them in some type of situation, well, we were honest and truthful with them. And next part of the question was, what can people do, I think, to protect themselves, to be safe? For instance, myself, if me and my wife go out and eat in a restaurant, I never sit with my back to the entrance. I'm not going to sit in a restaurant like this and the door and the entrance is behind my back. I'm going to sit where I can observe the entrance so I can see what's coming and going. You know, I'm not sitting there continue looking at it, but if I see or feel or hear something, well, I can look up and see what's going on. And that's something that I've always told my wife. So you go somewhere, you know, you be cognizant of how you get into that building and how you get out of it. And as you're going in and out, be observant of the things going on around you. And it's just a matter of being safe and cautious as to what are the things that are transpiring around you.